Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Grammar. Today, we will read a short story, but before we do so, let's first figure out what genre is. What is genre? A genre is a category of literature or other art forms based on style, form, and content. Think of them like groups of books that share similar features. Fiction. Imaginary stories created by the author. Nonfiction. Writing based on facts, real events, and real people. Poetry. Writing that expresses ideas and emotions through rhythm, imagery, and structure. Drama. Stories written to be performed by actors. Fantasy. Stories set in imaginary worlds with magical elements. Science fiction. Stories based on futuristic science, technology, or space exploration. Mystery. Stories centered around solving a crime or uncovering secrets. Historical fiction. Stories set in the past that blend real events with fictional characters. Biography, autobiography. Life stories of real people written by others or by themselves. What genre is The Little Match Girl? The Little Match Girl is a literary fairy tale, a genre that blends traditional fairy tale elements with literary style. It can also be classified as a short story with themes of tragedy, fantasy, and hope. Another point. How does literature teach empathy? In this literary world, readers can imagine what it is like to be in someone else's shoes. Therefore, they empathize by witnessing firsthand what others experience in different times and settings through reading. Exposition. The exposition of The Little Match Girl sets the scene in the mid 1800s on a cold, dark New Year's Eve in a busy city, where a little girl tries to sell matches but has had no success. She fears her father's abuse and refuses to go home without any money, forcing her to stay outside and huddle in a corner between two houses. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. It was so terribly cold, snow was falling, and it was almost dark. Evening came on, the last evening of the year. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl, bareheaded and barefoot, was walking through the streets. Of course, when she had left her house, she'd had slippers on. But what good had they been? They were giant slippers way too big for her, for they belonged to her mother. The little girl had lost them running across the road, where two carriages had rattled by terribly fast. One slipper she'd not been able to find again, and a boy had run off with the other, saying he could use it very well as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. And so the little girl walked on her naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron, she carried several packages of matches and held a box in her hand. No one had bought any from her all day long, and no one had given her a cent. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a picture of misery. Poor little girl. The snowflakes fell on her fair hair. In all the windows, lights were shining, and there was a wonderful smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she thought of that. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected farther out into the street than the other, she sat down and drew her little feet under her. She was getting colder and colder, but did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches nor earned a single cent, and her father would surely beat her. Besides, it was cold at home, for they had nothing over them but a roof through which the wind whistled. Even though the most significant cracks had been stuffed with straws and rags, her hands were almost dead with cold. Oh, how much one little match might warm her, if she could only take one from the box and rub it against the wall, and warm her hands. She drew one out. Wretch! How it sputtered and burned. It made a warm, bright flame, like a little candle, as she held her hands over it, but it gave a strange light. It really seemed to the little girl as if she were sitting before a great iron stove with shining brass knobs and a brass cover. How wonderfully the fire burned! How comfortable it was! The youngster stretched out her feet to warm them too. Then the little flame went out, the stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the burnt match in her hand. She struck another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and when the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a thin veil, and she could see through it into a room. On the table, a snow-white cloth was spread, and on it stood a shining dinner service. The roast goose steamed gloriously, stuffed with apples and prunes. And, what was still better, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled along the floor with a knife and fork in its breast, right over to the little girl. Then the match went out, and she could see only the thick, cold wall. She lit another match. Then she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much more attractive than the one she had seen last Christmas through the glass door at the wealthy merchant's home. Thousands of candles burned on the green branches, and colored pictures like those in the print shops looked down at her. The little girl reached both her hands towards them. Then the match went out, but the Christmas lights mounted higher. She saw them now as bright stars in the sky. One of them fell, forming a long line of fire. Now someone is dying, thought the little girl, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now dead, had told her when a star fell, a soul went up to God. She rubbed another match against the wall. It became bright again, and in the glow, the old grandmother stood clear and shining, kind and lovely. "Grandmother," cried the child, "oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear when the match is burned out. You will vanish like the warm stove and wonderful roast goose and the beautiful big Christmas tree." And she quickly struck the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother with her. And the matches burned with such a glow that it became brighter than daylight. Grandmother had never been so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both of them flew in brightness and joy above the earth, very, very high. And up there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor fear. They were with God. But in the corner, leaning against the wall, sat the little girl with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The New Year's sun rose upon a little pathetic figure. The child sat there, stiff and cold, holding the matches, of which one bundle was almost burned. She wanted to warm herself, the people said. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, and how happily she had gone with her old grandmother into the bright new year. Let's review some reading comprehension questions. What is the main reason the little girl is selling matches on New Year's Eve? She is trying to earn money for her family because they are poor, and she fears going home without selling any matches. What is the central theme of The Little Match Girl? The story explores themes of poverty, hope, compassion, and the contrast between suffering and peace and death. What does the author mean when he describes the girl's visions as bright and warm? The phrase symbolizes comfort, love, and happiness, things the little girl longs for but lacks in her real life. How does the author's use of imagery help the reader understand the girl's situation? The vivid descriptions of cold, hunger, and light help readers feel the girl's suffering and her brief moments of hope. How do the girl's visions connect to her real life experiences? Her visions reflect her deepest desires: warmth, food, love, and reunion with her grandmother, while her harsh reality contrasts with them. Why does the author end the story with the girl's death? The ending emphasizes the tragedy of poverty and the idea that the little girl finds peace and happiness only in the afterlife. What does the word frozen symbolize in the story? It symbolizes both the physical cold and the emotional neglect the girl experiences from society. What can be inferred about society's attitude towards the poor in the story? Society is indifferent and neglectful as people pass by the girl without offering help, showing a lack of compassion. What message does Hans Christian Andersen convey through the story? The story encourages empathy and awareness of others' suffering, especially that of children living in poverty. How would the story change if told from the perspective of a passerby? It would likely focus less on the girl's emotions and more on society's ignorance, reducing the emotional depth of her experience.